If you think you've done well, you need to also countenance that a lot of that is down to luck. You've been lucky with the parents that you had. You've been lucky if you were born into a safe family. You were lucky if you went to a good school. You were lucky that one of your parents didn't get sick or lose their job or whatever. And that doesn't make you better than anybody else. That makes you fortunate and you can be grateful, but you also need to use that good fortune, I think, to the betterment of other people. Hi, I'm Kimberley Wilson. I'm a Chartered Psychologist, and I'm here to help you understand how to take better care of your brain.
Kimberley, thank you so much for making time to join me on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to hear about this sort of journey that you've been on to build your expertise, to build your personal brand. Let's kind of start by going back and setting a little bit of the scene, creating some context for our listeners. What were your career aspirations when you were growing up?
I was one of those, and I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I knew very early what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work in psychology. I'd had a brief dabble thinking that I might want to be a lawyer, but more broadly, I always forget how much I think I was influenced by growing up and watching Frasier. And
hilarious.
So I did. I remember thinking, it would be so good to have, an agony aunt kind of radio show where people could call in with their problems and I could help them. And I'm almost certain that was just from watching Frasier too much in my.
What prompted you or motivated you to want to get into psychology? Was it something in particular?
It was a mixture of things. So I was always very bookish. I was the quiet one, always in the corner, very kind of watching people. My friend and I, we would sit in the coffee shop. We'd sit in Pret when Pret felt new and fancy, and we'd sit in the window of Pret and Oxford Circus with our mockers. So we'd be drinking our mockers and trying to work out, giving people personalities and backstories and what they were doing. And at the same time, in all the teenage magazines where they would have those agony aunt pages and what it means if, all of that stuff, I absolutely soaked it up. So that combination, I think, in terms of my personality of the observational part, and also the part of being a psychologist, which is really about problem solving and kind of archaeology.
How clear were you on the direction that you wanted to take with the type of clients you wanted to see, the type of psychologist you wanted to be?
By the time I qualified, though, I was already working. And by the time I was graduating, because I was a kind of higher level student, I was working in prison. And that ended up being my first job, because after I graduated, they wanted me to stay on. And so I stayed on. And then they wanted me to run the service. And then I was kind of promoted into managing the service. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire in terms of being a brand new psych graduate and working in what was then Europe's largest women's prison and working with some of the most traumatic clinical histories that you're ever going. What that gave me was a profound sense of our common humanity, because when you hear those stories, because I think one of the misconceptions about offenders and offending behavior is that someone chooses to be bad. Like you knew what the rules were, you knew what right from wrong, and you just chose to break the rules. And so you get what you deserve. And then when you see the story, the history laid out, you can see the accumulations of just trauma and neglect, and the way that these children, because invariably they were children when this pathway started, were just missed, that they fell through the cracks. They were missed by teachers, by social workers, by nurses, by GPs, that, sometimes were left on their own caring for younger siblings and nobody noticed. If you think you've done well, you need to also countenance that a lot of that is down to luck. You've been lucky with the parents that you had. You've been lucky if you were born into a safe family. You were lucky if you went to a good school. You were lucky that one of your parents didn't get sick or lose their job or whatever. And that doesn't make you better than anybody else. That makes you fortunate and you can be grateful, but you also need to use that good fortune, I think, to the betterment of other people.
What would you say is one thing that perhaps you wish you'd known when you first started out in your career or in sort of building your career as an expert?
What you do miss out on is having a team around you. So I would like to work more on, having a team. So maybe the importance of making sure, even if you're an independent practitioner, that you've got a team and mentors and people that you can kind of debrief with, because when you're not working in an organization, that is one of the things you miss out on.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you do what you do?
Because I love it. There is nothing more fascinating than human behavior, and there is nothing more joyous than seeing someone get their life back. It's just the best feeling, and I feel as though I have a front row seat to the best parts of the human spirit. And it's the most wonderful thing.
What would you say is the best part about your job?
Yeah. So when someone comes in and they say, I stood up to that bully, or I could have been horrible to myself, but I was nice to myself, or, just these little moments that show that someone believes in themselves more and values themselves more and believes that they are capable and deserving of happiness is the best feeling.
What would you say is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Well, the best advice is to go to supervision and be honest with your own therapist and get your head down and do the work.
That's great advice. So I guess then you mentioned that they were taking care of the sort of admin and maybe business side of things. Did that mean for you that it was time to start paying attention to that as well? And what did that journey look like?
Yes, because I'm laughing because I know that I don't do it very well. So I knew I had to have a website. So I got that far. I've got a website, and that certainly at the start I was trying to keep it updated because reading that it's important to keep things fresh, so that people can find you. So I was doing that. And so the main thing was having a website that looked half decent, because also you want it to look like you are a professional, and that, I'm not just doing this at my kitchen counter, like, tell me what your problems are. Like, you kind of want to portray a sense of professionalism.
Can you talk about what the decisions you've made have been to share your expertise online in a meaningful way that also doesn't sort of dilute the work that you do with a client in person?
Yeah. And, with the caveat that it is a line that I'm walking, and whether I hit that line right every time, I don't know, and it's going to be a course correcting as we go along. But what I very much try to do is to keep it about the information. It's about the information. It's about the psychology. It's about mental health. It's not about me. It's not about where I'm going, who I'm going there with. And so I try very much to hold that line. And sometimes you want to share, just a silly story or a thought that you've had, or, a reaction to something you're watching on TV. And I've had to kind of pull myself back. Everything in life is about those moments that become a slippery slope. And I think the more it starts to become about me as a person, me and my life and my lifestyle, than it is about the work. And I want it to stay and to always remain about the work.
Is there an extent to which you think about, what your message is, what you're sharing, what matters to you? And is that something that you could kind of sum up?
No, this isn't the way I think about it, which is really interesting. So the things that I want that I care about and that I want other people to know about are certainly food and nutrition, so the impact of food on mental health, and the role of food in child development and brain development, and food in prisons. I think that's really important. So those are my kind of campaign pieces. And those are things that I will come back to whenever there's something going on. So when the free school meals debacle was happening over the summer, I spent some time putting together some resources and information for people, because it was important, I felt, for people to understand what the big deal was. Other than that, and I think just good quality psychology. So one of the problems with social media and Instagram is that everything gets condensed down into a soundbite or a inspirational quote that's fundamentally meaningless. And sometimes it's sweet and encouraging, and people say, you got this. And I'm like, what if they haven't? What if they haven't got this? What to do when you don't got this? And how to know what the difference is between, having goals and perfectionism. And that's nuance, and that comes from the training and the experience. And I think that was one of the reasons that I felt it was important to be more valuable.
At what point you started to notice, an increase in engagement around your content and what that has meant for you or enabled you to achieve with your knowledge and kind of sharing that in the online space?
I think the biggest thing I noticed, it tends to be when someone else has mentioned me. So I certainly remember waking up one morning and feeling as if I'd stepped into the twilight zone, because I suddenly had all of these notifications for like hundreds of followers and I couldn't work out what was happening. And then it turned out that I think at that point, Alice Living had said something, that she'd either come to one of my seminars or had been, reading some of my content and had shared some of my content. So that tends to be the way that people find me. Like, I'm signposted as a resource by people with larger audience.
Yeah. I often feel like it's my job on this podcast to kind of point out to my guests how, successful they've been, because so many of them don't consider themselves to be either an entrepreneur or an expert or whatever. They're just kind of doing their thing. And it strikes me that you might not have an Instagram engagement strategy, but it almost feels to me like your strategy is to just be really good at what you do. And maybe you could just speak to that a little bit and the importance for you in your field of just being very good at what you do and what that looks like for you in terms of career development, investing in yourself.
Yeah, and thank you. I hope so. I hope that if I am known for anything other than sandwiches, that it's for being a trusted and reliable source of good information. That means a lot to me. And I follow the research. So I follow the people I follow in line are either foodies of some description, people who I can just kind of look at what they've made and get inspiration for my dinner, or scientists. And when a scientist releases a new piece of research, I will go off and I will read it and I will summarize it in my own mind. And if I think it's useful for my audience, I will try to make it accessible for them in some way. And so what I hope I'm doing is just absorbing and staying as up to date as possible with the areas that I try to kind of spend most of my time in. So in terms of protecting brain health and longevity and self-care and food and eating related issues, trying to stay on top of my professional game. So, I hope that I get people inspired and interested in finding out what the science says, and interested in understanding the science and not just being told what to do and just appealing to authority, that people feel that they are upskilled and empowered to find the right information for them and to ask the right questions and really to get the most reliable data and research for their own needs.
I guess as we wind up, I'd love to hear from you a little about what will feel good to you as a legacy, as things that you've achieved. What matters to you when you make those decisions about which path do I take?
I'm not sure how I would measure this, but I would love to be part of a wave that sees an improvement in the way we deal with brain health in particular. So I would love, for example, for in 30 years' time, for our rates of Alzheimer's disease to be coming down rather than going up. And that I would have played a part in people understanding, individuals, patients and public, but also governments, the NHS, health institutions, understanding that we do have power and a preventative role to play in these diseases that we just consider to be luck of the draw. So that would be a metric, like more people saying, I feel better or I feel empowered to take care of my brain would be amazing. So that's long game. I would like more broadly for the profession. So if psychology courses started to introduce nutrition as one of the modules, or even just as a lecture, here is the importance of nutrition for the work that you do. And no, you don't all have to do a degree in nutrition or become, part-time dietitians, but to understand that we should be asking people about in assessments, asking people about their lifestyle, because your lifestyle affects your mental health, and we need to stop seeing the brain and the body as separate from one another.
Thank you, Kimberley. I really appreciate you spending this time with me, and there have been some fantastic insights, such honesty and candidness, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been lovely. It's been a really good conversation. Thank you again for having me.